Think about the last time you handed your life over to a total stranger for the price of a 20-minute drive. You check the license plate, you verify the face, and you step inside, trusting a digital receipt to keep you safe from the monsters lurking behind the steering wheel. But tonight, the algorithm failed, and what pulled up to the curb wasn't just a car, it was a predator. The neon lights of the city were beginning to blur into a smeared watercolor mess of red and blue as I stood on the corner of 4th and Main. It was 3 in the morning, the kind of hour where the world feels unnervingly empty, as if the silence itself is waiting for something to break it. I could feel the cold dampness of the night air seeping through my thin coat, chilling my bones and making my hands shake as I fumbled with my phone. My battery was sitting at a precarious 4%, a tiny red sliver of life that felt like a countdown clock. I just wanted to be home, tucked under my covers, far away from the hollow echoes of the empty streets. I opened the rideshare app with a sense of desperate urgency, my thumb hovering over the screen as the little blue dot pulsed, trying to find my exact location in this concrete labyrinth. The map finally loaded, showing a few lonely icons crawling through the grid like mechanical beetles. I hit the request button, watching the spinning circle as it searched for a driver willing to brave the graveyard shift. After what felt like an eternity, the screen flickered and updated. A driver named Marcus was 4 minutes away in a silver sedan. I memorized the plate number and felt a small wave of relief wash over me. I tucked my phone into my pocket to save those precious last drops of power, staring down the dark asphalt. The street lights flickered overhead, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to dance just at the edge of my vision. Every rustle of a stray newspaper or the distant clatter of a dumpster lid made my heart skip a beat, my nerves frayed by exhaustion and the inherent vulnerability of being a woman alone in the dark. I kept checking the corner where Marcus was supposed to appear, imagining the soft glow of headlights cutting through the gloom. There is a specific kind of hyper-awareness that takes over when you are isolated. You notice the way the wind whistles through the alleyways, and the way the silence feels heavy, almost physical, pressing against your eardrums. I was counting the seconds, silently pleading for that silver car to arrive soon. Suddenly, a pair of headlights rounded the corner, moving much slower than I expected. They were bright, blindingly so, reflecting off the damp pavement in a way that forced me to squint and shield my eyes. As the vehicle drew closer, the engine emitted a low, predatory purr that didn't sound like the standard hum of a commuter car. My heart began to drum against my ribs as the silhouette of the car finally became clear under the amber glow of the street lamp. It wasn't silver. It was a deep obsidian black, so dark it seemed to absorb the surrounding light. The windows were tinted to an impenetrable degree, hiding whoever was sitting behind the wheel. It pulled up directly in front of me and stopped. I stood there for a moment, rooted to the spot, my mind trying to reconcile what I was seeing with the information I had burned into my brain just minutes ago. This wasn't Marcus, and this certainly wasn't a silver sedan. I pulled my phone out again, clicking the power button with a trembling thumb. The screen stayed black. The battery had finally died, leaving me standing in the dark with no way to verify anything. Maybe the app had glitched, I thought.
Maybe Marcus had changed cars and hadn't updated his profile. Or maybe this was a completely different ride I had somehow summoned in my exhausted state. The back window began to slide down with a slow mechanical hiss, revealing a void of darkness within.
"Sarah," a voice called out from the shadows of the car. It was a calm voice, remarkably steady and devoid of any discernible accent, yet it carried a weight that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. My name. He knew my name. I took a tentative step toward the vehicle, my brain screaming at me to run while my social conditioning pushed me to be polite. How could he know who I was if he wasn't my driver? The logic felt sound in the moment. If he knew my name, he must be the one I called. I leaned down slightly, trying to peer through the open window, but the interior was unnervingly dark, the only light coming from the dashboard instruments. I could just barely make out the outline of a man. He was wearing a dark suit that seemed to blend into the leather upholstery of the seat. He didn't turn his head to look at me at first. He just kept staring straight ahead through the windshield, as if he were waiting for a signal. His hands were gripped tightly on the steering wheel, his knuckles pale even in the dim light. There was something sterile about the car, a complete lack of personal items or the usual clutter you find in a rideshare. No phone mount, no air freshener, no discarded water bottles. It felt like a prop, a hollow shell designed to look like a vehicle, but lacking any sign of actual human occupancy. "Get in, Sarah. It's freezing out there," he said, and this time he turned his head slowly toward me. He didn't smile, but his expression was one of practiced, professional concern. His eyes were wide and unnervingly bright, catching the stray light from the street lamp in a way that made them look like polished glass. I reached for the door handle, my fingers brushing against the cold metal. It was a heavy, solid sensation. I began to pull, the door swinging open with a smoothness that felt almost oily. The smell hit me then, a mixture of expensive leather and something metallic, like the scent of a copper penny resting on your tongue. It was a clean smell, but it was suffocatingly intense. I had one foot inside the car, my weight shifting onto the plush carpet of the floor mat, when a sudden flash of movement caught my eye from further down the street. It was faint, just a glimmer of light reflecting off a metallic surface, but it was enough to make me pause. I looked back over my shoulder, squinting into the distance. About a block away, another set of headlights was approaching, much faster and more erratically than the black car. As it drew closer, the color became unmistakable in the wash of the neon signs. It was silver. My breath hitched in my throat as I realized the silver car was slowing down right where I had been standing just moments before. The black car's driver didn't look back. He didn't acknowledge the other vehicle at all. Instead, he reached over and placed his hand on the passenger seat. His fingers splayed out against the leather. "Sarah, we need to go. You're blocking traffic," he urged, his voice dropping an octave, becoming more insistent, almost predatory. But there was no traffic. The street was a graveyard, empty and silent except for the two cars and the beating of my own terrified heart. I looked at the silver car again and saw the license plate as it passed under a light. The blood drained from my face, leaving me cold and lightheaded. If that was Marcus, then who was sitting 3 inches away? I tried to pull my foot back, but my
muscles felt like lead, heavy and unresponsive. The man in the black car finally smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. It wasn't a smile of warmth or greeting. It was a mechanical baring of teeth, a gesture that didn't reach his eyes, which remained fixed on me with a terrifying, predatory intensity. He reached for the door handle on his side, his movement fluid and fast, far too fast for a normal person. Panic finally surged through me, a bolt of pure adrenaline that shattered the frozen state of my limbs. I yanked my foot out of the car and stumbled backward, scrambling to create distance.
The silver car had stopped now, and the driver, a man who actually looked like the photo I remembered, was peering out of his window with a look of utter confusion. I wanted to scream, to run to him, to beg him to drive as fast as possible, but I was transfixed by the black car. It didn't speed off. It didn't react with anger. Instead, the driver simply watched me, his smile never wavering as he slowly pulled the door shut. The click of the latch sounded like a gunshot in the silence of the night. He didn't drive away immediately. He just sat there, the engine idling, the dark windows reflecting my own terrified face back at me. I lunged toward the silver car, my hands slapping against the cold glass of the passenger window as I screamed for him to open the door. Marcus looked terrified, his eyes darting between me and the black vehicle idling just feet away. He hit the unlock button, and I dove inside, the scent of stale coffee and cheap air freshener feeling like the most beautiful thing in the world. "Go! Just go!" I shrieked, my voice cracking with hysteria. Marcus didn't ask questions. He slammed the car into gear and floored it, the tires screeching as we tore away. I looked into the rearview mirror, but the black car wasn't staying still. It was turning around. Marcus's tires shrieked against the asphalt, the smell of burnt rubber filling the cabin as we lurched forward into the darkness. I was trembling so violently that my teeth literally rattled in my skull, my eyes glued to the side mirror. For a heartbeat, the black car stayed stationary, its headlights like glowing predatory eyes against the midnight canvas. Then, with a calculated, terrifying grace, it began to pivot, turning in a tight arc that shouldn't have been possible at that speed. There was no hesitation in its movement, no frantic urgency, just a cold, mechanical intent to pursue. I watched as the sleek, dark silhouette aligned itself perfectly with our tail, the reflection of the street lamp sliding across its obsidian surface like a razor-sharp blade across the night. Marcus was panting, his knuckles white as they gripped the steering wheel with a desperate intensity that bordered on painful. He kept glancing at his rearview mirror, his face a mask of sheer, unadulterated confusion and growing dread. He tried to speak, his voice coming out as a strained, high-pitched croak that barely cut through the sound of the engine. "Who was that?" he managed to choke out, but I couldn't find the breath to answer him. My mind was a chaotic storm of what-ifs, and how did he know? The man in the black car hadn't just been waiting. He had known my name, he had anticipated my exact location, and he had worn a smile that suggested we were old friends. The city streets, usually so familiar and comforting, even at night, transformed into a labyrinth of shadows and treacherous corners. Marcus sped through a yellow light, the silver sedan groaning under the pressure, but the black car didn't lose an inch of ground.
It remained at a consistent, haunting distance, mirroring every turn and every slight adjustment we made. It was as if we were tethered together by an invisible, unbreakable chain of pure malice. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers slick with cold sweat, desperate to call the police. But the screen was behaving erratically. The rideshare app was still open, but the interface was distorted, the map showing Marcus's car and the phantom car as two identical dots merging into one.
I tried to exit the app to dial emergency services, but the touch screen was unresponsive, flickering with strange digital artifacts that looked like jagged teeth. A sense of technological isolation washed over me, a realization that whatever was happening wasn't just a physical pursuit, but something that had compromised my only lifeline to the outside world. Marcus saw me struggling and yelled for me to use his phone, which was mounted on the dashboard. I reached for it, but just as my fingers touched the plastic casing, the device went dark. The entire interior of the car plunged into a dim, eerie twilight, illuminated only by the frantic movement of the streetlights passing overhead in rhythmic, strobing flashes of cold and clinical white light. We were heading toward the industrial district, a place where the streetlights were fewer and the shadows were much deeper. Marcus was driving at nearly 80 miles per hour now, his breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps that echoed my own fear. He wasn't a hero. He was just a guy trying to finish his shift, and now he was caught in a nightmare he didn't understand. I looked back again, and the black car had turned off its headlights. It was now a void in the darkness, a localized patch of nothingness that was somehow still gaining on us. The terror of not being able to see our pursuer was almost worse than seeing his face, because now he could be anywhere in the dark.
"I'm going to pull into the gas station up ahead," Marcus shouted, his voice cracking with the strain of the high-speed chase. I saw the neon sign of an old 24-hour station flickering in the distance, a lonely beacon of artificial light in the encroaching gloom. It felt like a sanctuary, a place where there might be cameras, witnesses, or at least a locked door to hide behind. But as we got closer, my heart sank into my stomach. The lot was completely empty, the pumps dark, and the open sign was swinging loosely on a single hook, shattered. It looked like a graveyard for travelers. Marcus didn't slow down. He realized too late that this place was abandoned, a hollowed-out shell of a refuge.
He swerved back onto the main road, the car fishtailing slightly before regaining traction. The black car emerged from the darkness behind us, its headlights suddenly snapping back on with a blinding intensity that filled our entire cabin with a harsh white glare. I shielded my eyes, the brilliance burning into my retinas, and in that moment I felt a strange vibration beneath my feet. It wasn't the engine or the road. It was a rhythmic thumping, like a heavy heartbeat pulsing through the metal frame of the car. I looked at Marcus, and his eyes were wide with a different kind of fear. He felt it too. The silver car was starting to fail us, the engine sputtering and coughing like it was choking on something. "No, no, no, not now," Marcus screamed, pounding his fist against the dashboard as if he could beat the machine back into submission. The car began to lose speed, the needle on the speedometer dropping steadily despite his foot being buried in the floorboards. I looked behind us,
and the black car was slowing down as well, maintaining that same agonizing distance, as if it were savoring the moment of our mechanical collapse. It was playing with us, like a cat with a mouse that had finally run out of places to hide. The silence that followed the engine's final dying gasp was the loudest thing I had ever heard. A heavy, suffocating blanket of impending doom that settled over the entire cabin.
We coasted to a stop on the shoulder of the road, the only sound being the ticking of the cooling metal and our own frantic breathing. The industrial buildings around us were silent monoliths of brick and rusted steel, their windows like empty eye sockets watching our plight. The black car stopped about 50 yards behind us, its engine purring with a low, predatory hum that seemed to vibrate in my very bones. I looked at the door lock, making sure it was down, but the central locking system gave a weak, pathetic click and then popped back up. I pushed it down again, and again it popped up, as if some invisible force were insisting the passenger door remain completely accessible for our shadow. Marcus was frozen, his hands still fused to the wheel, staring straight ahead into the darkness. "We have to run," I whispered, though the idea of leaving the protection of the car felt like a death sentence. He didn't move. He looked like a statue carved from fear. I reached over and grabbed his shoulder, shaking him, and he finally turned to look at me. His eyes were bloodshot, and a single tear was rolling down his cheek. "He's not a driver," Marcus whispered, his voice so quiet I could barely hear him over the humming of the black car. "Look at the license plate." I turned my head, squinting through the rear window into the glare of the pursuing headlights and the dark, registrationless void. As the figure stepped out of the black car with a liquid, terrifying grace, I scrambled into the back seat, thinking we could exit through the other side. My hand brushed against a folder tucked into the seat pocket. Curiosity made me pull it out. Inside were dozens of printed photos of women standing on street corners, looking at their phones, waiting for rides. In the corner of every single photo was the silhouette of a black car. I looked at the most recent photo, and my blood turned to ice. It was a photo of me, taken just 10 minutes before I had even ordered the ride. The figure was at our door now, and he wasn't alone. The realization that the figure wasn't alone was like a cold blade sliding between my ribs. From the shadows behind the black sedan, 3 more silhouettes emerged, moving with a synchronized, eerie stillness that defied human nature. They didn't walk, they glided across the asphalt, closing the distance to our trapped vehicle. My fingers gripped the edges of the folder, the glossy photos of my own face crinkling under the pressure of my terror. Marcus let out a choked sob, his body finally reacting to the nightmare unfolding around us. The central lock clicked once more, a mocking sound in the silence, and the handle of the rear door began to move downward with agonizing deliberation. I felt the rush of freezing air as the seal finally broke open. The door swung wide, revealing the man from the sidewalk. But up close, he was less of a person and more of a void. His face was obscured by a high collar and a low-brimmed hat, yet I could feel his gaze burning through me, a predatory hunger that made my skin crawl. He didn't reach for me immediately. Instead, he stood there, watching my reaction to the photos scattered across the seat.
One of the other figures moved toward the driver's side, tapping a long, pale finger against Marcus's window. The sound was like a rhythmic heartbeat, steady and relentless. I realized then that this wasn't just a random abduction. It was a curated harvest, a systematic collection of people who trusted an algorithm to keep them safe.
Marcus suddenly snapped, the primal instinct for survival overriding his paralysis. He slammed the car into reverse, the tires screaming as they fought for traction on the rain-slicked pavement. The door I was huddled against swung violently, nearly tossing me out onto the road, but I lunged for the handle, pulling it shut with a strength I didn't know I possessed. The man in the hat was forced to step back as the car jolted backward, narrowly missing the front of the black sedan. We fishtailed wildly, the headlights of the pursuit vehicle illuminating the interior of our car like a strobe light in a house of horrors. I looked at Marcus, his face a mask of pure desperation, veins bulging as he fought the wheel.
We weren't just fleeing a car. We were fleeing an entire network that seemed to breathe with the city itself. As Marcus pushed the engine to its limit, the black car didn't just follow. It was joined by two others that pulled out from side streets, as if they had been waiting for this exact moment. They moved like a pack of wolves, herding us toward the industrial district, where the streetlights were sparse and the shadows were thick. Every time Marcus tried to turn, one of the black vehicles would cut him off, forcing us deeper into the labyrinth of warehouses and dead ends. I stared at the folder again, noticing a digital timestamp on the photos. They had been tracking my GPS long before I even ordered our...
The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The app wasn't compromised. It was the weapon. These predators weren't hacking the system. They were the system's dark reflection, using the very data we willingly surrender for convenience to map out our vulnerabilities. They knew where I worked, where I lived, and exactly how long I would wait on a corner before becoming impatient enough to ignore a red flag. Marcus was screaming now, a raw, guttural sound of terror as the steering wheel began to vibrate uncontrollably. The electronics in the dashboard started to flicker, the digital display scrolling through a series of names and addresses, a list of everyone who had vanished from the city streets over the last 6 months. I didn't wait for them to reach for me. I kicked the passenger door open, the metal clanging against a dumpster, and scrambled out into the filth of the alley. I ran toward the shipping containers, my breath coming in ragged, painful gasps that burned my lungs. Behind me, I heard the sound of a struggle, Marcus's voice rising in a final desperate plea before being abruptly cut off by a heavy thud. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I climbed a rusted ladder on the side of a container, my fingernails tearing as I clawed my way to the top. From my vantage point, I looked down and saw the figures dragging Marcus toward the trunk of the lead black car. From the top of the container, I could see beyond the alley, and what I saw broke my spirit entirely. Across the city, in the distance, I could see dozens of black cars idling on street corners, their hazard lights blinking in a slow, hypnotic rhythm. They were everywhere, a silent fleet woven into the fabric of the midnight commute, waiting for the next person to click a button and request a ride into the unknown. This wasn't a single cell of kidnappers. It was an industry. They had integrated themselves into the very infrastructure of modern life, hiding in plain As I watched, my phone screen began to change. The app I had used to call for the ride started deleting itself, the icon flickering and then vanishing from the home screen. My call history, my messages, my photos, everything was being wiped remotely, an invisible hand erasing my digital existence in real time. I was becoming a ghost before I was even dead. Below, the man in the hat looked up, his face still a blurred void, yet I knew he was smiling. He gestured toward the other containers, and I realized with a jolt of horror that I wasn't the only one hiding up here. In the darkness, I saw the pale faces of others watching the scene below. The figures didn't chase me further. They didn't need to. We were trapped in a facility that didn't exist on any map, surrounded by a fleet of cars that had no license plates, governed by a system that had already deleted our names. I looked down at the folder still clutched in my hand and saw the final page. It wasn't a photo, it was a contract, signed in a digital script that looked disturbingly like my own handwriting. It was a waiver of rights, a consent form hidden deep within the terms and conditions we all click accept on without ever reading. We had sold ourselves for the sake of a cheaper fare, never realizing the cost of the ride. The black cars eventually drove away, leaving the alley in a suffocating silence that felt heavier than the noise of the city. I climbed down, not because I was safe, but because there was nowhere left to go. The world I knew had been replaced by this dark architecture of predatory convenience, where every screen is a window for a watcher and every car is a potential cage. As I walked toward the main road, a silver car finally pulled up, the driver looking at his phone with a confused expression. "Are you Sarah?" he asked, his voice kind and normal.